Hello grade 4 students. I am Mrs. Dua and I'll be with you throughout all the lessons. We will talk about the first concept, which is survival and adaptation. In the first unit of living systems, I remind you that we have learned in the introduction of the unit about the anchor phenomena that focuses on the communication between the bats. And we said that we will collect information while studying the concepts of the unit that will help us in explaining the phenomena and answering all the questions that we wrote in page 3. This will help us to be ready for the final project of the unit about doing a research on bats. So, what I need from you before starting our lessons is to prepare a paper, pen, and school book. It's important to pay attention very well because we will always ask, observe, and think, exactly like scientists in everything we will learn. So, pay attention to the codes which will be in the school book throughout the lessons. They are called quick response codes, and it will be one of the methods that will make you access the videos and images and interactive activities that we will do. You can also use the digital version of the science book. Are you ready to start our first lesson on the Egyptian Knowledge Bank? The name of our first lesson in the beginning of each concept will be Wonder Lessons. We will learn in it about one of the phenomena that exist in nature and try to explore and understand why it happens, and our understanding to that phenomena will help us to learn more about the anchor phenomenon and the projects related to it. There will be a series of different activities, and first activity in our lesson is called Can You Explain? Well, what's required from us in this activity? We are required to think about all what we have learned before and use our previous knowledge to simply answer an important question, which will be with us throughout the concept. And this question is, how do different species of animals and plants adapt to survive harsh climates? It means that how the animals and plants can live in extremely hot places or extremely cold places. Let's remember what we studied before in the previous years that can help us in answering the question. This question talks about the climatic conditions, and we studied the different environments in the Discover book and learned how can we describe each environment. Is there anyone who can describe our environment in the summer? How it's like? Think about the temperature. Is it high or low? Exactly, it's high. Well, and what about the sunlight? Are there clouds the time? Or is the sunlight present? It's strong and present most of the day. Okay, what we do in the summer to adapt to this weather? It means what do we do to bear the temperature and protect ourselves from the heat of the sun? We wear light clothes and drink a lot of water. When we are in a place with a strong sunlight, we try to find a place where there is shade, and others hold umbrella. Okay, is this what we are doing? What do the different living organisms do if they live in a very hot place, like the desert, for example? The living organisms that live in the desert have an adaptation method or adapt to protect themselves from the extreme hot weather and protect their bodies from heating, like this animal. Has anyone seen it before? You can open the book on page 5 and you will find it. I want you to observe it very well. This is a lizard and it's called Sinai agama. It's small, as you can see, but has a long tail, 2 openings for ears on the sides of its head, and very sharp nails. Sinai agama? From its name, we can conclude that it lives in Egypt and is always found in deserts. So, it should find a way to protect itself from the high temperature and strong sunlight because it lives in the desert. I wonder how they adapt. The adaptation of this lizard, they search for places where there is shade and hide in them, like between rocks and in burrows to keep their bodies cool. Many other animals have different ways and methods for adaptation to help them in living in the hot desert. On the other hand, we will find other animals living in very cold places, and they also have ways for adaptation to help them feel warm. Now, I want you to think about all the information you know about how animals adapt and find ways to live in harsh environments. I mean, in hot and dry climates like deserts or extreme cold climates. One easy answer I thought of is the most famous animal found in the desert. I'm sure that all of you know it. I'm sure that you know that there is a specific part in its body that helps it to store food and water, and they are not easily found in the desert. I'm sure that a lot of thoughts of way more examples for animals that live in different places. I want you not to worry that you may have few ideas or not sure about what your ideas. When scientists study something for the first time, they always ask questions about what they want to learn, like our question. Then they think of information they already know. They then record this information. No matter how simple or few the information is, you will know how important your ideas at the end of our concept. Let's open page 5 and start writing our answers or ideas that you remember. Then they think of information they already know. They then record this information, no matter how simple or few information is. You will know how important your ideas are at the end of our concept. Let's open page 5 and start writing our answers or ideas that you remember. In extreme opposite to the dry and hot climate, when it's very cold and the temperature is low in the winter, we protect ourselves from the cold through wearing heavy clothes and drinking hot drinks. We do that to feel warm. Imagine if it's cold and I told you to stand with our feet on the ground. No, wait, standing with our feet on the snow? What? How it feels? Can you stand for a long time? No way. We can only stand for a few short moments, and then we will move quickly because our feet feel the extreme cold. Imagine if we were in the coldest place on the earth. The coldest place on the earth is Antarctica. The temperature will be very low and it will be full of snow. Despite the extreme cold, there are a group of different animals who survive these extreme life conditions. One of them is the penguin. I am wondering, and sure you are too, how can the penguin bear the extreme cold? How come its feet do not freeze when it walks on the snow? Let's start together with the second activity in page 6. Ask questions like scientists. This means asking all the questions we have to understand how the penguin can adapt in polar regions and how do his feet bear the cold. Now we are going to watch a video about the penguin living in the environment. And while watching the video, we will open our book and write down all the questions we will think about regarding the adaptation in the penguin's feet and write down any important information you will observe. Okay, let's go.
Antarctica, the coldest place on Earth. Temperatures down here plummet to a record minus 135.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine standing in those temperatures. Cold yet? Well, now imagine standing there without shoes or socks, just bare feet. After just 2 minutes, without warm blood pumping around your feet, your toes start to freeze and will eventually fall off. But amazingly, there is one animal whose feet are fine in this deep freeze: the penguin. They They stand around for months with bare toes, just chilling out. So, why don't penguins' feet freeze? These ice sheets are home to an estimated 40 million penguins. Huge groups of small southern rockhoppers, kings, and the biggest, most iconic, emperors. To keep their bodies warm in the freezing cold, all these brilliant birds have an insulating layer of fat and thick, downy feathers that trap warm air against the skin. Except on their feet. Look at them. Those toes have no feathers, no fat, nothing to keep them warm. Instead, clever internal plumbing keeps their toes toasty. Blood vessels bring cold blood up from the bare feet. Warm blood comes down from the feather-coated body. Where the blood meets, the vessels wrap around each other, allowing the hot blood to warm up the cold blood. It means blood going up into the body isn't cold, and blood pumping down is warm enough to keep their toes from freezing. If you're into science, it's called the countercurrent heat exchange. But when freezing Antarctic blizzards come in, even this biological brilliance needs help. To heat their toes, penguins sit on their backsides to raise their feet off the cold ice and wrap them and their young in their feathers. It's the equivalent of penguin slippers. These feet-warming tactics might not give them a grip on the ice, but it does give them happy feet.
Did you write down all the questions and the important information? I'll tell you now how I use my skills of asking questions, like a scientist, to understand more about what I watched in the video. When I heard about the penguin's feet and how they are warm, despite the snow in its cold environment, I wondered how this happened. Why don't the penguin's feet freeze? Penguins' feet stay warm and do not freeze because of the way of blood circulating within the blood vessels. The blood vessels are tubes through which blood passes. The blood vessels in the penguin's feet bring cold blood up. As we said, the cold blood goes up. And the warm blood moves down to the feet. Why the cold blood coming from the feet doesn't affect the rest of the body? And this is a very good and smart question. Imagine when we have a hot drink and hold the cup with our hands. The heat of the cup moves to our hand, and at the moment, our hands become warm too. So, we feel warmth. In the same way, the blood vessels in the penguin's body weave around each other, like what you see in the video. When they touch each other, the warm blood heats up the cold blood, and this makes the penguin's feet warm. This means that the penguin feet adapt to the environmental conditions, and this is one of the ways that help the penguin to survive and live. The adaptation in the penguin's feet is the phenomena we will investigate in our lesson. Like I told you before, phenomenon is an observable event that happens around us or in the nature, and we can study it. I wonder what other traits or characteristics in the penguin's body that help the penguin to feel warm. Other traits? Other traits? Did you notice? Exactly. The dense feathers and the fat layer under the skin keeps its body warm, and this is also considered adaptation. I mean, the traits in the body help it survive in Antarctica. Now, I'll let you read the text on page 6. This text will add to the information we gathered from the video about the adaptation of the penguin's feet. I want to remind you before you start, prepare your pen, or you may use textbook to highlight and underline the most important sentences and the main ideas you want to explore. Go, 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 and hunt for additional information that we are looking for. What were the most important sentences? Exactly, the sentences that describe why the penguin's feet endure the cold. Let's read these sentences together. We can also highlight any word that we do not understand while reading to ask about it or search about its meaning in the glossary of terms. It's the time for the questions related to the phenomenon. It's your turn. Open the book on page 7 and think about the questions in it. They are very easy questions. How do the penguin's feet help them to survive in cold climates? The second question is, make a list of other questions you have about penguin or other animals that live in cold environments. Take your time and you can use the text paragraph to help you to think. The first question is very easy for you for sure, because we underlined the answers related to it in the text in the book. When we explain the way the blood moves inside the blood vessels. The second question focuses on asking all the questions we have about penguins or any other animal that lives in Antarctic. I prepared some questions asked by some of your colleagues, and I'm very excited to share them with you. And you know your questions. These questions are: what are the different ways the animals use to adapt in cold regions? Are there any other ways for the penguin to feel warm? Are there other birds similar to the penguin in adaptation? And as we have seen the question of your colleagues, I also have a question that I'd like you to discuss with each other in the class. We have studied that the fennec fox have large ears that help it to live in the desert. And we have known today that the blood vessels in the penguin's feet have an important role in keeping the feet warm. I wonder what are the similarities and differences between these adaptations? Fox ears, penguin's feet. It could be, for example, that the similarity between them is that these adaptations are part of their bodies, or that without them they will not be able to live. Can you think of any other similarity or difference? I know that we ask too many questions about this lesson. This is what the scientists always do when they learn a new thing. They ask all the questions they have to discover and search for information that could help them to understand well about what they learn. For sure, you also, when you start learning a new concept, you must have many questions about it. Like when we watched the video of the penguin together, some of you might have asked, do all the animals that live in polar regions have blood vessels wrapped around each other? Or other students of you asked, how does the penguin's head stay warm even though it didn't have thick feathers like the rest of the body? The one who thought about this question, he uses a very important skill, which is observation, because he looks at all the body parts of the penguins and observes that there is no dense feathers on the head. And this makes us move to the third activity in our lesson, observe like a scientist. Through this activity, we will know how animals of the same species have different ways of adapting because they live in different environments. And we will know that by reading the text and observing the information in it very well, because it will help us to know the relation between the adaptation and the environment. Surely some of you now are asking, what is the meaning of observing the text? Observing the text means that we must read the text very well and identify the main and important information. Now open page 8 and start reading the text and take notes of all of your observations. I identified in the text plenty of very important observations, and I can now share them with you. I observed that the text defines adaptations as characteristics that help the living organisms to survive in the ecosystems where they live. It means that the body of these organisms has traits that help them to live in the place where they live. I also learned that there can be animals of the same species that have different ways of adaptation because they live in different environments. Let's observe the polar bear. The polar bear lives in its environment. What is the color of the fur of this polar bear? White? Exactly. Okay. Where does it live? In Arctic. And how does its surrounding environment look like? Full of snow? Has anyone observed a similarity between the bear and the environment? Its fur is white like the snow. Exactly. And this helps it to hide in the snow and not to be readily apparent as it sneaks up on its prey suddenly, and also to protect itself and hide from any wild creature that may attack it. How about the brown bear? Can anyone observe that it's brown like its environment? Exactly like the color of the trees in the forest. And the color of the fur also help it, like the polar bear, that it hunts easily and hide from its enemies. Although the two are bears, their adaptations are different due to their different environment. But in the desert, some animals have golden fur, like fennec fox. I mean, the color of the fur is like the color of the sand in the desert and the rocks. And there are also caracals. Caracals are a species of cats. Caracal are a species of cats, but they look totally different from the normal cats and live in the deserts and savanna forest, and they are very fast in catching their prey. Their fur also helps them to hide. Because there are some colorful rocks in the desert, we will find out that the color of the lizard scale which live in the desert is like the color of the rocks to the extent that we can look at a rock and cannot easily recognize the lizard standing on it. Because of the similar colors, let's think. Can anyone say what do we call the way of adaptation? The way of adaptation about all of these animals is camouflage. Camouflage is what mainly helps animals because they protect themselves from predators that can attack them and hide so they can hunt easily. And this is what eventually enables them to survive in their ecosystem in which they live. After we have known all this information, it's your turn to ask your questions on page 9. You can write down 3 questions about the adaptations of the animals, like the questions you have. Can animals change the color of their fur with the change of seasons? These questions will help you to know what you still want to learn about the concept of adaptation and survival. Take your time and write down your questions. Today's lesson ended quickly, but we learned important and basic information about adaptation and survival. What about revising it together? We learned about Sinai Agama lizard and its way of adaptation to bear the high temperature by searching for places where there is shade. We learned about the phenomenon in question, the adaptation of the penguin's feet and its blood vessels are wrapped around each other. And when they touch each other, the warm blood warms the cold blood, and this makes the feet stay warm and keep them from freezing. We learned that the way of adaptation of animals happen in responses to the environment where they live. This is why each animal has its own adaptation depending on its environment. We learned that camouflage is one of these ways, and it helps the animal to survive, protect themselves, and catch their prey easily. Like polar bear, brown bear, fennec fox, caracals, and lizards. We also use 2 important behaviors that scientists follow. Ask questions like a scientist, Observe like a scientist. Don't forget, we learned key term about today's lesson, including prey, adaptation, and camouflage. If anyone loves drawing, he can draw a picture that expresses the camouflage of an animal in its environment, and color it and describe this image in one sentence. And it must include the word camouflage. And now it's your turn to prepare your next lesson. Do you think that animals are able to adapt to different environments? Because this is a part of their body's composition, they were born like that, or they adopt certain behaviors according to the situation they are exposed to. Don't forget to revise our today's lesson and think about the question until we meet each other in our next lesson. Thank you.